get started. So thanks everybody for attending today. My name is Matt McGurk. You tuned into the Source Defense Rapid Action Plan for PCI Compliance webinar for here, October the 10th, 2024. We're going to get you up to speed with the kind of absolute essentials. What I want you to walk out of here with today is a concise understanding of what the problem is, what some solutions might look like, and what you can do most immediately, because time is kind of the essence now. We've all got until March of 2025 to get something going, and with the holidays, code freezes, I don't know, the natural amount of time it takes to complete a project, that is a very short period, in my opinion. Let me give you a little introduction to who I am and who we are, just so you know who's offering this information. Source Defense, we are a security company that focuses exclusively in solving the problems related to the code inside web pages, really. The problems mandated by PCI DSS 4.0 in 643 and 1161 are now our sole area of focus. We've been around for nearly 8 years now, from the time of our very first founding until today. We are pleased to say we're protecting thousands of websites. I do think we do have the best offering in the market to solve for this problem, especially in the context of a tight compliance schedule, and et cetera. And you know, we've a number of partners in this space, so I do feel we're pretty well established, and I'm grateful for the success that we've achieved along the way. My name is Matt McGurk. I'm our head of field engineering, meaning that anything involving, you know, the demonstration or testing or ongoing success of our platform falls into my purview. I've been here at Source Defense for this is actually October. This is the beginning of my 7th year here at Source Defense. I also have an extensive background in web application development, so the subject matter where these requirements live and the relevant topics. So it's a long way of saying I should be able to answer any questions anybody has, or it'll be really embarrassing for me, actually. Some of you I see on the phone have probably heard that joke before, so I apologize for recycling, but you know, here we are. So format-wise, like I said, I want to give you just, at this point, I think most of us are probably pretty steeped in the requirements themselves, so there won't be an extensive kind of overview here, but I do want you to have the essentials. I want to talk about what I've observed and what we've seen from security assessors, folks involved in drafting the compliance. Like, if you're a merchant, what are you actually expected to do, and what are your assessors or other parties expecting to see? I want to give you a little microcosm of that, because I think it helped frame like how to actually solve the problem. I want to talk about solutions to the problem, and then I want to give you kind of a quick, you know, task list. You don't have to take it, but like how I see what someone trying to solve this problem would need to do most immediately to get it taken care of. So that's my goal for the next few minutes. As I said before we got started live, if you have any questions, do feel free to throw them in the webinar chat. I might try to answer some of them as they come. I'll certainly have time for them at the end, so feel free to add those at any time, and I'll take them. So the topic du jour is DSS 4.0, and what we here at Source Defense refer to as client-side security. Now, that term refers to web pages, basically. It's meant to call out the distinction between server-side security, so things like firewall, WAF, encryption, all that good stuff. That's a different subject area than client-side security, which basically means the front end of your web application, the web pages where your visitors interact with your brand or your service, or et cetera. Client-side JavaScript has existed since the beginning of the World Wide Web, more or less. It lagged a little bit behind HTML and stuff, but the situation we find ourselves in today is that the modern web page is a very complicated piece of software, is not an unfair way to say it. If you think about it, you can run Microsoft Office inside your web browser now, and once upon a time, it was just for reading news articles. Front-end JavaScript, client-side JavaScript is made up of many different kinds of code and purposes and et cetera. So everything from what I would call first-party JavaScript, meaning the things that would be developed by an organization or integrated directly into their own development practices, you know, the stuff that you write that makes your website what it is. You also, on any modern website, will have third-party integrations, meaning that code that is served from other parts of the internet Basically, your web pages instruct a visitor's web browser to download code from another part of the internet and execute it to provide a business function. So, analytics or customer support chat or anything that kind of makes the website have some more oomph and meets a business requirement. This landscape gets pretty complicated because you do have a supply chain effect in here, which is similar to any other supply chain kind of context. Sometimes when we hear supply chain, we think about Log4j or SolarWinds or et cetera. So it's the same fundamental concept, but a little bit more complicated in some ways. When a web page loads, you will have what I call third-party JavaScript, those vendor integrations that are running. These are, you'll have a contract with these people most often, and they're integrated into the web pages. However, they have their own relationships, which they will include on the fly into the web page, into the web browser. Things like in this example I'm showing here, a tool called Taboola would include a tool called Solvi, which may then include a tool called, or not called, but something like Facebook Connect, their analytics tool. So it's similar to the supply chain effects you may hear from about libraries being integrated. However, it's closer to a full-blown application, and it's happening in the visitor's web browser on the fly. And not really at your request exactly. It's just a relationship that the other parties, the third parties, are dragging in there. So I highlight this in specific because it is one of the unique challenges of this area of payment page security, and one of the things that I think is kind of a foundational idea as we describe the rest of it. I'm going to hop into the requirements themselves here. Like I said, I would assume most folks are at least glancingly familiar with these, so I'm not going to read them to you or give you a whole tutorial. I'm just going to distill them down into what I see as the actual tasks that someone must do for 643 and 1161. Well, maybe just a little more context. The new requirements in DSS4 4.0.1 now related to payment page security are 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. Those two things overlap. In fact, in my opinion, 643 is about implementing controls. 1161 is about tamper-proofing those controls. They're related intimately. But like I said, when you stick them together, they boil down to what I would say 4 different tasks. And I guess one more note. These have been best practice for about 18 months, 2 years now, as the draft of 4.0 worked its way into the current version. And as of March of 2025, they will become requirement, not just best practice. And the general sentiment I've heard from assessors and et cetera is that they like to see evidence prior to that a control has been in place, or some equivalent. So we're in a kind of transitional period between best practice and required right now, and that's why there's so much tension on this topic. 643, the 4 things. Let's get to it. You have to inventory payment page scripts. So the JavaScript that's running on your payment pages does need to have an inventory. Why is this code there? Do you know about all of it? Do you have a mechanism to keep that inventory up to date? So as this is a new topic, the spirit of this thing is literally just have the information available. Justification then is the next step beyond that. So you know it's there, but you have to have a reason that it is there, an explanation as to why it's integrated. You then must verify, or assure rather, the integrity of each payment page script, meaning that those scripts may not change or behave differently without you knowing about it. It can't just be kind of a fire and forget. It can't be a gap in your overall posture and overall intelligence. It does need to be an active component of what you're doing to secure the web pages. The next part in 1161 then refers to a couple things. Monitoring script and payment page contents. I feel there's a significant amount of overlap with the verifying integrity and et cetera. It's the same kind of theme as some parts of 6.4.3. The other thing that is kind of its own little cousin to the rest of this, it is really not about scripts, everything else about scripts. However, it is also mandated that we keep track of what are called HTTP response headers on our payment pages. And for anyone who's not intimately familiar with the hypertext transfer protocol, the headers are metadata that the server sends to the browser along with the rest of the content. So we as visitors, when we're going to a website, we don't see the headers, but they influence how the browser deals with the contents of the web page, and they contain security settings. So there's certain ways to tackle parts of this problem via web headers. And so the spirit of this thing, in my opinion, is to make sure if you're implementing security controls through headers, that they don't get removed without you knowing about it. Because either that's a misconfiguration or it's an indicator of compromise. So you got to make sure the stuff you put into place still works later on. I think I'm going to make one more clarification or kind of one more note here before we move on. As many of you are probably aware, the scope of what counts as a payment page expanded significantly from 3.2 to 4.0. There is additional language in PCI DSS 4.0 that puts a very common technique to reduce scope back in scope. So what I'm getting at here is that a very common way of implementing a payment page is to embed a trusted payment service provider's iframe, an inline frame, into a merchant's own website. And that, if you're not super technical, basically means you've got two different web pages that are laid on top of each other, and it's a very clean way to separate concerns, like code in one frame can't touch the other one and all this other stuff. So under 3.2, that would dramatically decrease the scope for a website, a merchant's website, using that technique. Under 4.0, those pages into which an iframe is embedded are in scope now. That counts as a payment page. So I think probably most folks on the phone are aware we've got more to do than we did 2 years ago. There's other considerations I get into, kind of nitty gritty, like what counts as a payment page. Cardholder data being present is something to think about. In my opinion, I don't think an actual payment needs to take place if I'm entering a card number to save it in a wallet for its future transaction or something like that. That's a payment page in my opinion, but defer to your local QSA, of course, for your own scope. In this next bit here, I want to talk about some data and some research and some insights that we've gathered over the last couple of years in partnership with members of the QSA community, with partnerships and et cetera. So I want to give you an idea of like, how are these rules being interpreted and what are folks talking about in terms of solving for this. So my goal here in this next section is to tell you, as you're considering your strategy and how to solve it, like, is that strategy going to match up with the expectations that we're seeing out in the space? And I'm going to start here with the Verizon 2024 Payment Security Report. So we partnered with Verizon to produce one of the sections of this report specifically related to this topic. And I just wanted to call out, I would encourage you to hit Verizon's website, grab a copy of this. If you haven't already, it's kind of a keystone document, and in my opinion, very useful. But I wanted to give you an idea of like what the overall demographics, if you will, on this problem are. So this is research that we conducted, Source Defense conducted across, as you can see there in the footer, in the subhead, about 7,000 unique websites. And so this situation is extremely widespread. I'd say 98% of the internet is affected by, if they're merchants, are affected one way or the other, and 98% overall do have some kind of JavaScript integration, which would fall into these categories. As you might expect, overwhelmingly, the most interesting or the most common thing to be found on a website are analytics tools. So your Google Analytics, your Facebook Connects, so on and so forth. One of the most valuable things, as I think we're all aware, is visitor data, understanding the shopping patterns or the interaction patterns of visitors, what they're clicking on, what's attractive to them and not. That stuff's basically gold in marketing land or in business overall. And so as a result, those tools are heavily utilized. As we go down the list, you see things like, what I want to call out here are those two most prevalent categories, analytics and tag management. If anyone's not familiar with tag management, tag is slang or developer jargon for a JavaScript integration, like I was talking about. Facebook Connect would be a tag. So tag management is a script itself, a tag manager that gets embedded in a web page and makes it very simple for a non-technical user to add other scripts to the page. So one of the earliest challenges in web dev was we've got all these marketing tools or we've got all these other tools that other parts of the business want to integrate, but they are not technical users. They understand how to acquire technology and how to implement it operationally, but they don't understand how to integrate it into the website. And so as a result, we saw this growth of tag management tools, which basically give very easy to use interfaces to non-technical users. Copy and paste some code in here and it ends up on the website. That's the idea. So these two categories represent like kind of a crazy amount of risk. They're the most popular, and they are very risky from a data privacy security standpoint. Analytics, obviously, visitor data collection is going to put you in a space of lots of different kinds of problems. Is the data getting collected that is being collected by that analytics tool acceptable for it to be collecting? Things like, I keep saying Facebook Connect, but it's just on my mind today, and it's extremely common. Those tools like that will be by default configured to access all of the data on a website, to scrape every form field, to give the marketer out in the Facebook dashboard the most flexibility to configure the Facebook tool. I want to know when someone clicks on the quantity button. I want to know when someone clicks on add a product to cart. So to give that flexibility over in the marketing tool, it will be extremely aggressive in the web page, and that may be a very big problem depending on your, I'm talking about other compliances like GDPR or PCI absolutely attaches. You put a marketing tool on a page where a card field is present, it might get vacuumed up along with everything else. So analytics, I think, is a pretty clear example of where you should focus your attention. Tag management then has those concerns because it has unfettered access, just like every other piece of JavaScript, to user data. However, it also introduced kind of a security operations, or let's call it policy procedure aspect. Who has access to that tool to add code to the front end of the website, to the web pages of the website? Is that tag management tool present on a payment page? Is there a good governance around when code gets added, when it gets removed, et cetera, et cetera? And there are particular attacks related to eSkimming and et cetera that take advantage of tag managers. You can, I won't get into the technicals on this call, but you can do some pretty slick stuff about changing the config of a tag manager on the fly and injecting lots of nasty code. So like I said, as we see the most prevalent script categories here, and as you look at your own sites, if I were trying to focus down where to pay the most attention in my inventory and justification and really interrogating the site overall, I would start, maybe ironically, I'm not sure, but the most prevalent things are also the ones of most concern, unfortunately. When we look at the ones that are looking at behaviors that exist, specifically in this case on payment pages. So the scope of the prior slide was the entirety of a population, the entirety of websites in that population. This is just payment pages. So we see a huge amount of just general data access, so touching form fields in general, but we do see a very large amount of sensitive data being accessed. So of the overall data accessed on these 7,000 websites on their payment pages, 22% of it's personally identifiable, and then about 5% for each credentials and payment data. So as I said a moment ago, I think a very reasonable hypothesis is this is misconfigured marketing stuff. These are tools that are being overly aggressive. They certainly do include attacks in some cases in the overall sample size, but overall, we're going to see that kind of misconfiguration or bad design architecture choices coming to bear here. And this kind of information is, if you harken back to the requirements themselves, the inventorying and justification, this is the kind of ambient stuff that we need to know about. So we have scripts on our payment pages. What are they doing? Why are they doing that? How can we manage that? How can we justify it, right, to our assessors or others? One last call out here from the data in there. I thought it's interesting to look at where are the, well, not just me and the rest of the team who put this together, but what industries, what verticals see the most integration and therefore the most interesting behavior on payment pages. And apparel and fashion, as well as business services and food and beverage, you can see there kind of represent a lump at the left of the most prevalent, with apparel and fashion being an outlier there. In my opinion, I think the more customization and the more visitor or consumer choice present in the vertical, the more integrations and therefore the more kind of data access you're going to see. So I guess one way to view this particular graph is that if you are in apparel and fashion, you may have a bigger challenge ahead of you than, for instance, in education. But something else to keep in mind here is that the volume of data access does not indicate the severity or the importance of addressing this issue overall. Think of each incident of data access as kind of a roll of the dice. Like, was that permissible? Was the data that was accessed sensitive in some way? Was the party that accessed it a malicious actor or just a misconfigured tool. So it's not to say that 162 and 6,219 aren't necessarily one's bigger than the other, but it could be just as serious, right? I guess is the way to say it. There's a couple different dimensions of the risk that you would want to consider in these. And then in some specific qualitative examples, you do see items related to, I think the Verizon report does a really nice job of calling out some of the risks I've discussed previously, and also the consequence in a DSS sense. So Facebook Connect, I will also just say in my own professional experience over the last years, Facebook Connect is a nasty piece of business. I don't think they're doing anything actively malicious, but it is one of the most intensive and invasive pieces of technology to go on the front end of a website that I've ever seen. It's by far the most invasive tool. It doesn't have to be. It can be configured correctly. It can be limited in scope and other things, but like out of the box as implemented, it's really aggressive. And again, it's a different context, but we're starting to see regulation and scrutiny in the healthcare around this, cases where Facebook Connect is put on like find a doctor pages. So you type in your zip code, you say, I need an orthopedic surgeon. Bam, that was a healthcare record that just got created. And then you get an ad on Facebook later for knee braces, right? So look at these tools, scrutinize them across your organization. These are the kind of things that QSAs are going to be asking. Do you need Facebook Connect on here? Who has access to Google Tag Manager on the payment page? These sorts of things, as well as consider what the consequences of those things being on there. And like everything else, it's going to be a balancing act. I've talked to folks along the way who say like, oh, well, I need to limit this down to just the scripts that are related to payments. Like it's somehow, if I'm just using Stripe to implement, I mean, you could do that. But if you have the DSS says a technical or business reason to have scripts like this on your payment pages, that may very well be the case. This may be critical to your business. I mean, and for many it is that you have a kind of critical insight into the customer journey, into paying for stuff and to checking out, et cetera. So it's not so much about, it's about limiting, right? And properly managing rather than elimination altogether. We've also worked in a more, let's say, qualitative sense with a couple of firms. We have their white papers available as well. So again, in the interest of arming you all with the information, like the context you need, excuse me, to properly solve this problem, I thought I'd share their insights here. We worked with Coalfire and we asked them to take a look at our solution, to interpret the requirements overall. We'll put in the chat, by the way, the links to these so you can look at them at length if you like. But I thought a takeaway from Coalfire was very interesting, because as I believe most of us on the call have probably thought about over the last little bit, as you've been looking at these requirements, the definition of a payment page is pretty clear. I mean, I think they do a good job of spelling out what a payment page is. It's got multiple documents or a single document where form fields are present that can collect cardholder data. I think that Coalfire calls out this very interesting nuance in this. It's not really a nuance, but like the general idea that Coalfire makes here is that if a visitor is going through a checkout process and they believe they're interacting with the brand and they believe that they're interacting with the application in a way that it's supposed to be interacted with, and something is introduced into that workflow, which is malicious or can take advantage of that trust, then that should be considered in your like overall strategy. What they call it is a payment flow, meaning that part of the nature of these attacks is that the web page can be modified by the attacker. The attacker can change the look or feel of a web page, introduce their own form. The attacker can add a payment form or anything else they want anywhere on the website. And so as a result, it's not just, they use the word eSkimming a lot in DSS, but it's not just eSkimming, it's injecting your own form, content defacement, form jacking. And so Coalfire's argument and kind of thesis here, to use a word for it, is that you should consider the entirety of that payment flow. From a requirement standpoint, you may be able to be more narrow, but from a practical security standpoint, looking at the whole thing from the time a visitor clicks on checkout through the end of the process as a ripe area for exploitation. So understandably and justifiably, everybody this year is very closely looking at how to, I mean, like overall the game, right, is limiting scope. From a practical security standpoint, consider seriously where the other weaknesses exist in that payment flow process. And then also architecturally. So depending on the architecture of your website and your web applications, if you have things going on like a single page application, I won't get too much into the technicals here, but if it's possible to kind of add a payment page anywhere in the flow of your app, again, I'm talking technically, I click a button and the web page basically stays the same under the hood, but a payment flow can appear dynamically. You should seriously scrutinize whether that counts as a payment page. I've talked to folks, there's a good chance the entire app is in scope. Because of some architectural choice, like legitimate ones. I'm not trying to say anybody did anything wrong, but ways we can engineer a web application, web pages, can dramatically increase the scope. So as you're considering the problem and what you're trying to solve, start with the entire payment process from soup to nuts. Because if the cardholder thinks they're interacting with you, the general kind of theme is they are interacting with you, even if that content in there is weird or from an outside place. Viking Cloud, another great resource in my opinion, and we'll provide this as a takeaway as well. They get more into the nitty-gritty of approaches to solve the problem and different ways to solve the problem. So if the prior work was more about how to understand it, how to think about it, how to scope it, this is going to be how to solve it, right? I think Viking Cloud did a really good job here. They call out something that you may have noticed in the requirements called CSP and SRI. And I'll briefly talk about those technologies in case anyone's unfamiliar. CSP stands for Content Security Policy. Content Security Policy is a way of instructing the web browser about what files it may load and interact with, and what that code is allowed to do in a very high level sense. So kind of like where can it talk to on the internet, but a very high level. So CSP, I think it's fair to describe as a blacklisting, whitelisting approach. You're going to tell the web browser exactly what resources it can load and from where. And if the browser attempts to load a resource that's outside of that list, it will be blocked altogether. And the cousin to CSP and SRI then is something called, or excuse me, the CSP is sub-resource integrity, SRI. SRI is a hashing technique. And actually, let me go back to this slide a little bit earlier so I have something to illustrate. So if CSP is about defining what these are and where they are and providing a vetted list to the browser, sub-resource integrity is about generating hashes or fingerprints. So basically, you go through and you generate a hash for each of these, and then you provide that to the web browser. And then the web browser checks those hashes at runtime. So the browser literally gets the file from somewhere else and says, hey, is this what I expected? If it is what's expected, it will be permitted to load. If it is not what is expected, if the file is different, it will be forbidden. The browser will not load it. Those are CSP and SRI. And the approach here, I mean, as you might have gleaned from the last little bit there, is about making sure the file doesn't change. Like if this file changes location or contents, then don't load it. The challenge with that, particularly with this third-party stuff, this third-party code, is that it's going to change all the time. These files don't live on your own servers. They live on Google's or Facebook's or one of their partnerships or et cetera. It's some host on the internet. And so as a result, you as a merchant or a service provider can't control when that code changes, strictly just because of like version releases and stuff. The more pernicious part of it is that this code often changes at the time of request. So what I mean is as the browser's going through and loading this stuff, the server on the other side might change the contents of the file based on the request to bake in a user token, like to add unique identifying information. There's a technique called cache busting, which is incredibly common in web dev, where you put junk in the file, you just random string of characters to force the browser to load the most recent version of the file. And so if you think about it, how could you possibly generate a fingerprint for something that changes all the time? You just can't. The consequence of CSP and SRI being implemented and misconfigured, let's say, or even, I mean, configured properly, but the file changes, location changes, is that the files simply, the browser simply stops. I mean, it'll continue doing the web page, but whatever that functionality is drops away. It could break the page, it could change the page's behavior, could interfere with the overall checkout process, so on and so forth. What Viking Cloud advocates for in here, in their paper, is looking at behavior rather than files. File integrity, the word integrity, the concept is defined like, I don't know, 4 or 5 different ways across DSS as a whole. I think in this case, strictly file comparison is not going to do it as a practical security mechanism. CSP and SRI aren't bad technologies. I usually call them well-intentioned. And if you have an exceptionally simple web application, if you control the parts of it, when it's released and how it works, you may be in a position to implement those. If you have anything even slightly more complex than that, you're going to be in trouble. Source Defense, as well as others, but generally speaking, the strategy should be, in our opinion, to look at behaviors. So to look at what is a script doing? Is it talking to a weird domain? Is it interacting with a form field that's related to card data? Is it putting weird stuff in browser story? Like, what is it doing as it's running in the visitor's web browser, rather than just where it came from and is the file the same as I expected it? The reason there is twofold. One, you have a more practical control over things. Who really cares if the file changes? It's about our credit card numbers leaving your site. Secondly, it's just more maintainable because you're scoping to behavior, you're scoping to what the app is doing rather than trying to play whack-a-mole with different file versions. So you can be the approach can be both more flexible and more effective, I think is the way I would put it. And one of the main things I would urge you to, if you're looking at CSP and SRI, is just actually interrogate the amount of time it's going to take to do, especially as we get down here to the waning weeks of 2024. I don't know. I think you have to start the project like today if it's going to get implemented properly. It's just a big lift. I want to talk a little bit more about that approach and what we do, and then I will summarize here with some thoughts about what you should do next, in my opinion. So Source Defense does have what we call a client-side security platform. That means that we have a whole bunch of tools and techniques and technology that we've developed over the years to be specifically tailored to this use case. What I've brought up on the screen here is our PCI DSS dashboard. So like I said, we've been around for like 8 years. We've been solving the underlying problem. One way to put it is any of our customers who came on board prior to 2022, when the requirements came out, everybody in the past was already compliant before the requirements were written. This dashboard summarizes exactly how we help. It's meant to do a few different things at once. One, it gives a kind of very easy list of things for people to do. Like, what do I need to do day to day to make sure that my website is secure and compliant? So these boxes at the bottom literally call out precisely how we do that and give you big red numbers saying, here's what you need to do to make sure things are going smoothly. The second thing it should be able to do is serve as evidence. So one of the big themes I've heard from assessors and from others is that the concept of what counts as evidence to control, to satisfy these controls, how can you prove you're satisfying them, is going to be a topic of interest. So whether you're rolling your own and you're kind of doing a spreadsheet inventory with justifications and et cetera, or something like this, that they're going to be looking for a mature and coherent way to verify the evidence that you've actually done something. So that's what this is meant to do. And the third and maybe most important thing is we've baked a lot of process in here. What I mean by that is, I'm as maybe kind of commonplace as it is, we've built in a lot of really excellent product tutorialization in here. We've basically given you the ability to get someone up to speed, maybe with 15 to 30 minutes of what are we doing and why, and then say, okay, go through the tutorials here, and Source Defense is going to tell you what you need to do to make sure the website is compliant. What do you need to click on? Why is it important? Why is it here? What do you need to do on the day-to-day to make sure that this stuff is being enacted and we're being compliant? And I think this year in particular, as folks are just getting their hands around how to do this, that kind of thing is going to be invaluable, because not only do we have to find a solution and implement it, I mean, when I'm speaking on your behalf, sorry, as merchants and service providers and otherwise in-scope organizations, not only do we have to find a solution and implement it over the next 6 months, we also need to operationalize it. And like, who's going to do that? So I think the process being built in here is very, in my opinion, very useful. We have a lot more capability. There's a significant amount more under the, or not under the hood, above the hood, in different interfaces throughout the dashboard. Things like automatic script identification and classification. So knowing what's on your site, visualizing what it is and why it's there. You know, if you imagine one way to approach this task, I'm just going to pull up the New York Times here for no particular reason. But if I were to show you all the JavaScript that loads in here, right? This is what, you know, this is what you'd be tasked with doing if this were your payment page. Finding all these files, figuring out why they're here, writing a justification for them, so on and so forth. So contrast that with this, right? Or if somebody walks into my office, this is data from sourcedefense.com, if you were curious. If someone were to walk into my office today and ask me, why is the YouTube image preview script on our website? I wouldn't have to go spelunking through that list of files. I could say, oh, it's here because the YouTube player is here, because we're using a marketing tool called Matomo. So I think that little user story there pretty cleanly illustrates why a tool-based approach is superior to something like CSP and SRI, where you are spelunking. I don't know, just kind of latching onto that word. I like it for all the files and everything else, and then maintaining evidence of it. Behavior also is a key part of our strategy, as you may have noticed. We are about observing the scripts and collecting an immense amount of telemetry and deciding what's important and servicing that to our customers. So at a glance here, I can see what scripts are interacting with personally identifiable information, transferring data out of the browser, so on and so forth. So a snapshot view of everything that's happening across my site, so I can be informed and make reasonable decisions. We also further combine that into an event model. So I think it's pretty common across security. I think most of us have probably seen this in other tools. Same general idea. Take those hundreds of signals, distill them down into behaviors, take those 10 or so behaviors, distill them down into events that are actionable and can be tuned based on what you want your scripts to do, what you want to be alerted on, making sure you're only receiving the most really clean signal to noise is what I'm trying to get at here. If I click through these, I can show you a couple other things here. For instance, any scripts that are interacting with PII, now I have a quick ad hoc report of this. So if I do, one way to do this, right, in terms of evidence and working with this, simply give read-only access to your assessors or your counsel or whoever needs it. Just send it that way. Or export any of this from the interface as a spreadsheet. You know, lawyers love spreadsheets. So if you want to send it something in their native language, you can take it there. I want to point out too, we can automatically narrow any of this data down to the scope of PCI. What I mean by that is most typically our software is deployed across an entire website. It can be deployed just to the PCI scope, but if you want to deploy it site-wide, we can automatically narrow stuff down to the data, the scripts, the inventory, the evidence, down to just the PCI scope for you, so you don't have to do that manually. If I click through to a script detail page, I want to give you just a little more detail about how we do this part. So justification does also live in here. We give you a way to justify right in this UI, and that will let you have a system of record. So rather than, you know, spreadsheets, cocktail napkins, etc., one source of truth for this information. Also an immense amount of additional information about those behaviors. So if you do want to interrogate, as you're thinking about the justification, if you're thinking about why those scripts are there, do we need tag managers on, do we need Facebook Connect on payment pages? You can see exactly what that data access is and verify that you're being good stewards over your customers' data. The other thing this interface lets me do, like I mentioned before, is tune my alerting. So I can decide what the acceptable behaviors are for a script to perform, and I'm only going to receive alerts when something unacceptable happens. So so a script is sending data to a blacklisted domain, accessing card data, anything out of the normal. We will notify based on that and leave you alone, not generate a bunch of alerts when the acceptable normal behaviors are occurring. So if we harken back to the Viking Cloud and Coalfire white papers, behavioral approach, that's what we're doing here. Last, and I think probably most importantly, we're not just a scanning tool. We are an active security control that gets implemented inside of websites. What that means is we can actually control those behaviors as the web page is living and breathing in the visitor's web browser. We can enforce rules about what the scripts are allowed to do and what they aren't allowed to do. So in a practical sense, what that means is that we will lock down scripts, your Facebooks, your Googles, your Matomos, etc., to the least necessary set of permissions required in order to perform their job, and nothing in excess of that. So we're more like a behavioral filter than we are a kill switch. So if at any time the script does try to access PII data that it does not need permission, that it doesn't need access to, we would block that. It would still be permitted to do its job. So Google Analytics could still set a cookie, it could still send beacons back to Google. It just can't scrape card numbers or personally identifiable information off the page. If I were to show you, I'll show you a quick practical example of that. What I'm going to do here is simulate a supply chain attack. So don't fear, I am in the network, or rather the console of my web browser. It's just the normal debugging tools inside Google Chrome. This will be the most technical part, but also I'll be easy about it. So what I'm doing here is adding a supply chain attack. We're imagining that on this web page, somewhere further right in this graph, that a malicious script got appended or just something like it. I'm just doing that on the fly through my browser. But nothing actually bad is happening to the Times website. So when I inject those supply chain attacks, you can see here that the page was defaced. What I mean by that is the contents of the web page were changed in a way that the author did not intend or expect. The second thing that my demonstration attack has done is to install the world's simplest keylogger. So when I begin to type into the search box here, you can see that my keystrokes are stolen from the page on the fly. The takeaway I want to leave you with this, and I'll move on here in a moment, but these are the hallmarks of this kind of attack. Changing the reason why PCI DSS 643 and 1161 exist is changing the page in a way the author did not intended, and introducing behavior that, or skimming or whatever, that is harmful to the visitor. So imagine this same thing, but rather than my kind of slightly humorous example, overlaying another card payment form on top of the legitimate iframe. Injecting a pop-up that says, give me your credit card number now and we'll give you 50% off, whatever. That's why the payment flow thing is also important, right? Because it doesn't matter where I am in the app or the experience. If I can do stuff, and by me here, I mean the attacker. If the attacker can do stuff like this, it doesn't matter where they are in the app. From a practical sense, they're going to get the card number at the end of the day. If I do that same thing on a web page where Source Defense is running, this is at one of our demo sites. I use it a lot. We're running inside this web page. We're collecting that data you saw before, but we're also very actively controlling what code is and is not allowed to do. So I'm going to inject those same scripts I did before. They do the same thing. You can see here the scripts still run. I'm going to reinforce that idea of a behavioral filter, not just a kill switch, but if it's good, we'll let it happen. If it's bad, we'll prevent it. And what that means is the page has remained unchanged. It hasn't been defaced. And if I try to type something here into the search box, you can see that my keystrokes are redacted. So the information was not able to be skimmed. And just to reinforce one more time, that's going to happen whether we're talking about malice or whether we're talking about misconfiguration. So whether the stuff's collecting it innocently or it's an active attack, we're still controlling that stuff. Just puts you in a really strong position, both from the compliance standpoint as well as from a practical security standpoint. So I did think it's important to walk through those handful of items, as well as our general stance with PCI, which is to consolidate the information down to the bare essentials, the critical factors, give you options to control the code and to make decisions, and then get out of your way. And also to bake as much of the process into this to make sure that when we're talking about operationalizing these things, it's out of the box. I think that's an important thing, especially as we come down to the end of, I was going to say the end of time, that's not true, but the end of our time available to solve for this problem. So you consider how you're going to operationalize it. So I'm going to now summarize. What are you going to do now? As we get to what I just said a moment ago, the end of time apparently is where I went with that. I think you should do these things. I think you should socialize the risk. What I mean is that, especially in compliance, we're getting stuff we have to do. We're telling other people to do things because someone told us to do things. You know, it's the box checking exercise. But I do think these documents we've talked about today, as well as the themes, as well as the consequences and the attack, talk to people about the risk and that you're actually substantially making things better for the organization by eliminating this. I think that gets the point across much more succinctly and much more effectively than just saying we got to check a box in 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. That's, you know, anyway. I think you should be realistic about resources. What I mean by that is whether you go with a vendor approach, whether you do your own thing internally, Do consider the impact of solving for this, whether that's application development time, whether it's dollars, whether it's et cetera. Look at those figures, balance them out. CSP and SRI seem like they're in there, and we could just roll our own and we can do this, but they're not a weekend project. It's going to take application development time to do those things. So a critical part of this, just like any project, is the resource allocation up front, but kind of a unique twist on it this time, because new subject area, new maybe cross-functional parts of the org, whatever it is, it's kind of got a different flavor this time. Commit to an approach. This is something I've seen over the last months and years, is kind of trying one thing and abandoning it and going to another. I think with being informed in the first 2 points, like figuring out what you can do and how serious it is, then you got to kind of commit, because I have seen folks go down one path, 6 months later, it didn't quite work out, et cetera. Especially with where we are on the calendar, I think you got to pick one and run it through. And then keep an eye on evidence. So as you're going through the project, either on the requirement side or the implementation side, I think that would be my guiding star, so to speak, in this. That would be my compass point, is how am I going to prove this control is working in a concise way in the future that doesn't ask somebody to spend a month or a week or whatever reporting on it, right? So I think that is a useful way to kind of, in your mind, put those things together, and guide the project overall is the evidence component. Obviously, the practical security control that's solving the problem, the shutting down eSkimming, like that's really important. And also, how is that funneling into summarizing all that work together, rather than kind of having a disparate bunch of parts that all kind of need their own check-in and their own measurement and their own discussion. So that is what I have for you today. I hope it was useful to you. As we mentioned in our introduction to this stuff, the materials we sent out before and et cetera, we do have a way for you to get started incredibly fast. Hit this URL. We will set up a dashboard just like I showed you a moment ago for your own site. We can show you what we would do with that and how you can get started. If you'd like, then we can follow up and talk to you about how you can interact with that, how we could help you further with it. But basically, even if you don't ever talk to us again, this would give you a huge leg up on the inventory part of it and everything else, because you saw the dashboards. That will at least get you started. And then hopefully we could talk about how we can improve that even further for you in the future. But nonetheless, sourcedefense.com/free PCI. You fill that out. Probably me. I do a lot of stuff here. We'll talk to you about the dashboard and the data you see in that. And then we can take it from there. So hit that QR code too if you'd like. I'll take a look at the chat. I didn't see too much activity along the way, but I'm happy to see if anyone does have questions. Feel free to throw them in there, and we'll take those as they come. And as we're wrapping up here, thank you so much to Scott, my faithful producer and partner in security, for helping with everything. There's a lot of behind the scenes work, and we appreciate Scott. All right, I see folks filtering out. I do not see questions, so I'm going to call it there. I want to thank everybody for your time and attention. Once again, my name is Matthew at sourcedefense.com, if I can be of any use. And I'm very grateful. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks.